So let's say we take the CEO of Alibaba, I mean the founder of Alibaba in this case, Jack Ma, right? So if you watch him online, he has a very thick Chinese accent when he's speaking English. But the punchline is nobody cares because he doesn't care.
Hello, Brenden. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Hey, it's great to be here, Marty. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure, my pleasure. And for anybody listening to this, and for anybody that is not yet familiar with who you are and what you do, can you introduce yourself to us?
Yep, for sure. My name's Brenden Kumarasamy. I'm the founder of Master Talk. Master Talk is both a YouTube channel I started to help the world master the art of communication and public speaking. And I also have a coaching practice for senior level executives and CEOs to help them become top 1% communicators in their industry.
Did you get started with that? What's your background with, like you said, communication and public speaking?
For sure, Marty. My background is actually a complete accident in how I turned into communication. I actually studied in accounting when I was in college, which is literally the opposite of what you'd expect a
Yes.
comms professional to be studying. But I was a numbers guy. And then as I got older, I started doing these things called case competitions. Think of it like professional sports, Marty, but for nerds. So other guys my age are playing footy or cricket or basketball or baseball. I wasn't one of those guys. I did presentations competitively, and that's how I learned how to speak. But then as I got even older, I started coaching a lot of the students in college, mostly for free back then, just to help them win competitions. And I accidentally got really good at communication coaching. So then when I was 22, I said to myself, nobody's really creating free content for the younger generation on how to communicate in a way that's tangible and practical. So I just started making videos in my mom's basement in January 2019, and Master Talk turned into something I never could have imagined.
Okay. And is that something that you felt came to you naturally? Like you said, you were doing those presentations, coaching others. Is that something that you just had a knack for?
Yeah, a lot of people think that, and some of it is true, but generally speaking, not really. I'll tell you why. So, a couple of reasons. Number one, I have a physical disability in my left arm, so it's crooked. So because of that, I had a lot of anxiety as a kid when I'd speak to audiences because people would always look at my arm, they wouldn't look at my face, and they still do that today when I'm in person. That's one. The second piece is in Montreal, for those who don't know, it's a city where you need to know how to speak French if you want to do well in, but it's a language I didn't know, Marty. So when I was growing up, I had to study in French. I studied my whole life in the French education system, which means every time I had to go up and give a presentation, I didn't know the language. So I'd look at the crowd and go, bonjour. And that was my life growing up as a kid. And then the third big obstacle I had to face was being an accounting major. I mean, who would think that a communication professional would come from accounting? So yeah, do I think some of it's natural? For sure. I mean, I'm not going to deny that, but a lot of it was definitely hard earned. And that's why I believe anyone can be a great speaker.
I suppose the whole Zoom kind of cutouts are a benefit.
In my case, yeah, for sure.
Nice. Awesome. Awesome. Perfect, Brandon. And tell me a little bit about your coaching background. So you mentioned that you started doing that more of as a probably side thing, and then you noticed, oh, hey, I could do that full time. Can you tell me some stories of the people that you've worked with? Have they also been, like you said, very much maybe numbers people, or have you coached some people that you noticed, oh wow, you're actually really good at this? Can you share some stories?
Yeah, for sure, Marty. Happy to. So at the beginning, to your point, coaching wasn't really something I wanted to do full time. I didn't even know it was a business at the beginning. Because the first 50, I've probably coached maybe 200 people at this point. But the first 50 people I've coached were for free, like because they were just in students in college. I just wanted them to be successful. But how this turned into a business was in September of 2019, which is 9 months into Master Talk. I met my business partner at a 5 a.m. workout in the middle of nowhere in like Columbus, Ohio, for some event that a guy was hosting. And he looked at me and he said, "Hey, I like your videos a lot. You're pretty good at this. Why don't you coach executives for money?" But I was 23 at the time, Marty. So I was like, come on, no one's gonna pay me to coach them. He's like, sure, a lot of people in the Indian community as tech executives, they would gladly pay you thousands of dollars. I was like, really? He's like, yeah, all my clients are tech executives. Let's just work together and split the revenue. And that's how I got my first 10 clients, and then the rest was kind of history from there. But today, I would say the clients range from different categories. I would say the main three, because communication coaching is really vague, right? You could have a bunch of different types of people and backgrounds. But I'd say the main three are the Indian technology professionals. Think vice president of engineering at Amazon. The second type is the female executive, who's usually a VP. So at that level, women in general, they feel really isolated and lonely in corporate because there are not a lot of women at that level. So they hire communication coaches to help them stay sharp so they can be better than the other men in the boardroom and always stand out. That's the second archetype that I've had a lot of success with. And the third one is the tech CEO who wants to raise venture capital.
What would you say is your preference? Do you have any?
I mean, I love all three. It's like picking between your kids, right? So I love all three a lot, but the one I've had the most success in, just numbers wise, revenue wise, has definitely been the first category, which is the Indian technology professional, because I have very little competition in that space, and that community
Mhm.
largely just trusts me. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And would you say that that's something that is also, like you said, basically a numbers game? But I suppose, like you said, with the second category of the women VPs, I suppose, like you said, there's just not a whole lot of them out there in the first place. So I suppose it just makes sense statistically.
Yeah, you got it, Marty. Like a good way of thinking about this, because there's like, I mean, I can go into this if you want. There's like pros and cons between each of the niches. So the brown niche, the big pro, is I don't have any competition. There's probably one other guy who does this with an American accent at a high level for people who are VPs and above. So whenever I get on a call with them, it's basically they hire me or they don't invest in coaching at all. So that's good. But there's a con too, is that they're a little bit more challenging to work with because they have really thick Indian accents. So I have to spend a lot more time to push them. And since they're not naturally, like for example, you're a good example because you're investing a lot in yourself. You're doing podcasting, you're coaching other people on educational aspects. So you're easier to coach to work with. Whereas somebody in that community, I'm like the only coach they've ever hired in their life. So for them, they don't really understand personal growth. So I have to really take the time and slow things down. Women executives, the big pro. Actually, let's start with the con. The big con is they're really difficult to close. It's hard to get their trust, especially when you're a young Indian kid like me. But the big pro is they're the biggest advocates for your brand. They have huge networks. Like one executive client that I would close always leads to like two or three other referrals. So in that way, the executive women is generally my favorite. But most of the time, to get that client, it's usually word of mouth. It's hard on social media to get them and to invest in you. That's the con with that. Whereas the con with the brown community is that the word of mouth is really difficult because even if they know a lot of people, they don't invest in themselves. So they're like, oh, should I really pay thousands of dollars for this? Whereas the executive women, they're investing coaches all the time. And then the third niche, the technology CEO, they're super fun to work with. You can get really great results for them, but a lot of them are broke. So you have to be selective with who you pick because a lot of them are starting companies. So
It sounds like you've got it all figured out.
it's when you said that it was so powerful because when I started, I had no idea about any of this. That's why my advice for business owners, especially in coaching, you don't know. Like I didn't know at the beginning when I was 22. I mean, I could tell you a big story about, Marty, I actually knew it was going to be executive women and
Yeah.
brown tech. I had no clue. I thought students were going to pay me and they were all broke, so that wasn't going to work. I thought early stage founders were going to pay me. That didn't work either. There was a specific type of tech CEOs. So I tried 20 different niches until I landed at those three. So I hate the whole advice of niching down. You only know that later, not at the beginning.
And I do want to come back a little bit to what you said with the people that you work with the heavy accents. How do you deal with that? How do you do some speech coaching or therapy, or do you get other people involved?
For sure. So my belief is accent reduction is really difficult. There's some professionals who have done that and they're good at it. And I'll probably take their classes so I can get better at it myself because I always want to learn from other coaches and their perspectives. But here's where my current opinion stands. I don't like working through the accent because I don't think that's the main issue. The main issue for me is the mindset, and I'll explain why I believe that. So let's say we take the CEO of Alibaba, I mean the founder of Alibaba in this case, Jack Ma, right? So if you watch him online, he has a very thick Chinese accent when he's speaking English. But the punchline is nobody cares because he doesn't care. Like he doesn't jump on a session and go, uh, yeah, and he starts talking in English. So he talks English, even if it's a little broken, he communicates that English with such confidence that you go, wow, like he's the founder of Alibaba. And that's really the point I want to drive. Whether it's Sundar Pichai from Alphabet, the guy who's the CEO of Google, right? Like him, he has a thick Indian accent. Nobody cares. And that's really the point that I jump for those clients is yeah, accent could be reduced to a certain degree, but I think that's incremental. It's more about saying, are you doing when you're speaking? Are you smiling when you're communicating? Are you pacing? A lot of Indian guys, they're always speaking really, really fast. That's true with everybody, honestly. And their vocal tones are really monotone. But notice how these things, Marty, have nothing to do with the accent. It's all about getting rid and fixing those points. And that's really what I focus on with clients, not the accent.
How do you recommend for people to do that if they do have a lot of these is it some daily kinds of routines or some exercises? How do you deal with that?
For sure. So for that specifically, what I would recommend, that we can go into exercises in general for speaking if you want later in the interview, which is understanding why we say ums and ahs in the first place. Why do we say them? Why do we go ah? So, the reason is because when we were growing up as children, whether you were born and raised in Poland or the United States or Canada or the UK, we all grew up in a similar education system where we're giving presentations to groups of students when we're in high school, when we're 13, 12, 11 years old. So whenever we're in front of that classroom and we don't know what we want to say next, we go to buy us time. So that's the reason why we say filler words. Or if you have a guest on your podcast and you ask them a question, they go, so they're thinking. And I'm sure you've seen that a lot. So now the next question becomes, what do exceptional communicators do differently to buy time? Because they're not smarter than us. They have to think too. It's just the way they do it, Marty, is different. They'll replace their ums and ahs with nothing. So instead of going, that's a really good point, Marty. It's a great question. Instead, they just do this. Right, Marty? So this is the way that I would approach it. So they replace their ums and ahs with pausing. And then the last piece, which is number three, is like, how do you practice this? I don't think people will implement this. I hope they do. But the way I coach clients on this is called the endless gaze. So what I get them to do is I have them partner up with somebody in their home, or they'll do it in person at my events, but they could do it with their wife, their husband, their boyfriend, their brother, their sister, and they sit down with them for 3 minutes straight. They stare into their eyes without saying a single word. It's really uncomfortable, but it teaches you how to pause really well.
I feel like that's something that a lot of people are uncomfortable with, and I feel like that makes a lot of sense. On the one hand, what you're talking about, I mean, there's a very clear background to this, and I can very, very much relate to that. I remember in my literature class, we had to give presentations, and our English teacher said, okay, for every that you say during this presentation, I'm going to deduct 5 points or something like that. And everybody was practicing it before the presentations. Okay, we can't say and we would police each other and so on. I feel like that was a very good strategy because everybody was on their A game that time. But it does make a lot of sense. I think a lot of people get the sense that, oh, if I don't say anything, they'll think I'm stupid or I don't know what to say or whatever, all of these really strange thoughts that a lot of people seem to have. So that's something that I like to preach as well. It's better to just say nothing sometimes than very true. Very true.
That's very well articulated, by the way. I agree, Marty. It's a lot of us, we believe that whenever we say nothing, that the audience thinks we're stupid because we're not saying anything. And the best way to coach the person on that is to flip it, where you pause for them and then you just ask them, did you think I was stupid or dumb? And they go, no, why do you ask that? And then you go, well, then why do you think other people think that of you? And then that breaks the mindset they have in their mind.
That's good. That's good. I like that. I like that. Okay. Okay. Do you use that very often?
Yeah, I do. I do. It's probably so the way I do it is a little sneakier than what your teacher does, which is fine. Like I don't disagree with her approach. I'm a lot more stealth with it, where I'll add pauses in a speech. I call this the 5 levels of speech, where like I'll take a client and I'll put the word pause in the script. So every time they read the script with me at the beginning, they have to pause whenever it says pause. But after they do this 3, 4 times, 90% of their ums and ahs go away without them noticing. So it's never tied to a punishment. It just becomes an unintended consequence of them adding more pauses into their speech.
Can you share some more of these, like you said that you have the five stages of speech, you called them?
For sure. And I'm happy to go into those, but they're just hard to implement. So I think what I'll
Hmm.
do, but I'll go through those five with you, absolutely. But then I'll give you kind of like what are the exercises to like actually do that are easy.
Definitely.
Because the 5 levels I have to sit down and add it all, and it's hard to
Mhm.
understand, but I'll go through them. So the 5 levels are smiling, pausing, vocal tone variety, pacing, and putting it all together. So smiling just means a lot of people, for those of you watching the video, they go like this, right? They don't smile at all when they're talking or when they're listening, right? So let's say you listen like this without smiling, you actually tell, which you actually don't make this mistake. You actually do this really well, Marty. But the most people when they're listening is they don't smile at all. So when somebody's speaking and they're noticing the other person's smiling, the thought process is, oh my God, I guess what I'm saying really sucks. But a lot of people don't notice that because nobody tells them. The pausing we talked about, vocal tones is like 3 different tones, and then you add high tones, low tones, and pacing just means, I'm honestly in general, it just means slow down when you're talking. So those are the 5 levels.
I feel like this is something that a lot of non-native speakers struggle with that I work with very often because they get nervous and so they just want to say everything as quickly as they can so nobody notices their mistakes or nobody, oh, did I say the or and that if they speak very, very quickly, then maybe nobody will notice and then I just, okay, just calm down a little bit. It's okay.
I like that. I like that reasoning a lot. That makes a lot of sense to me, actually. Because the one I tell clients, but yours is a new one, I'm going to add to my pocketbook, is because the mindset with a lot of these immigrants is they want to get in and out of the room as quickly as possible. So they'll pace faster to get this over with a lot quicker. But your reasoning is really strong too. So I think both were.
Does that work? That they just finish saying what they have to say and then is that the end or is there some kind of maybe question exercise at the end or something that makes them stay and they're like, damn it, I hope this would work, but it didn't.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's like this whole the mindset of, but I loved your argument. I think that makes perfect sense too, where if you speak really quickly, then people might not notice you have an accent. I think that's perfectly valid. But then you're right, at the end of the presentation, when they get into Q&A, they're still stuck in the presentation. So you just got to fix it out.
True, definitely. And how do you handle the different culture side of this? Because what we were talking about before briefly, that you are in Canada, but you do work with people from different countries. And do you ever coach in other languages as well? Is it just English? You mentioned French. Has that ever improved? Do you do any coaching with French or any other languages, or is it just English for you?
For sure, Marty. So I'm fluent in 3 different languages, just for the audience: English, French, and Tamil. Tamil's my mother tongue, that's spoken primarily in Sri Lanka and Singapore. So whenever I'm coaching clients, what I will say is 90 to 95% I'm doing it in English, but there's going to be situations where I'll pull out the other 2 languages, though my Tamil is very elementary. So the Tamil I'll pull out if I'm closing a client. So if I'm on a client and I switch to Tamil, they just trust me like 10 times more, right? If they're fluent in the language, obviously. So that'll be,
Sure.
so I'll explain the offer, the
What?
coaching. They'll say, what are you talking Polish? What is this? You're like, what's
Yeah.
going on? So if I'm closing, and this happened maybe a handful of times in my career, where it's just like, for sure, we're going to work with Brenden because he knows the language. So sometimes, like just today, I have a client called somebody's fluent in Tamil, but his English is so good that it doesn't, like, we don't speak in Tamil, but I might say a couple of jokes in Tamil as we're coaching. French, though, there have been situations where I've done full coaching sessions in French, and it's just because there's not a lot of speech coaches who are fluent in both of those languages. So there have been 3 or 4 occasions, once again, where I've signed kind of bigger accounts in my home city. I don't have a lot of clients in Montreal because my prices are too high for them, but there have been situations where I've worked with like a CEO or like some VP who likes French a lot, and I'll do it in French, and they'll really appreciate that for sure.
Would you say that any of the mindsets or the behaviors change with the language?
Yeah, thanks for the follow up. So the mindset, For me, I would say a lot of those mindset changes, to your point, are really into the culture of who they are as a
Mm,
society. So I'll give a few examples, but honestly, the nuances aren't too big because the game is the same. And I'll give you kind of my easy threes later, which is like these are the three exercises. Doesn't matter what culture, ethnicity you're from, you should just do them. But I would say the big nuances I've seen definitely French clients who live in Montreal. They don't really invest in themselves a lot.
okay.
And French is a little bit more of an aggressive language. I've seen this a lot with clients who are fluent in German, but who come from a German background. So they're born and raised in Germany, and then they come to the U.S. or Canada. So those types of languages, but more so German than French, honestly, is they have a lot more aggressive vocal tones when they're speaking. So even if they're very happy people, like I have a lot of friends who are German, when they're speaking, it's like whenever they're talking. So to somebody outside of their culture, it just sounds really, really intimidating. So that's one. The opposite of that is also true. Very soft. Japanese culture is a great example of that, where they're talking really this, and they're very quiet because culturally they're not supposed to be loud, especially women, right? Not to call them out in particular, but just to make this easier for people to understand. So, but even men too are relatively quiet on the Asian side. Not Japan is the easiest example, but China applies too, Taiwan applies too, Vietnam applies too. So then it's more of a question of, and even India as well, you got to speak up more when you're talking. You got to project your voice a lot more because whatever is loud to you, let me repeat this again, whatever feels loud to you in those cultures is average tonality for everybody else. So if you talk like this, to you that sounds average, but to everyone else that sounds quiet. So those are the main differences I've seen off the top of the bat there.
Is that something that you think affects their communication as well, in terms of, like you said, okay, if I speak very quietly, are they then perhaps less likely to maybe be good negotiators, good in quotes, or have some kind of different connection issues as a result of that?
That's you're asking great questions, Marty. I think the reason why I haven't spent too much time going deeper on this is because since the service is so high touch and it's such a small client base that I'm
Mm,
super just hands-on with each individual case. But your question has a lot of validity. I now that I think about it, you are right, where there's a lot of causation relationships that happen in their life. I'll give you one common one that I see with my clients who are from Indian background is they roll their V's as W's a lot. So whenever
okay.
they say vision, instead of going vision, they'll go vision. Right? They'll do that a lot. So that's an example that's more consistent. I think the other one that I've seen that's more consistent is the it's not that the projection leads to the outcome, it's actually the opposite. So the cultural upbringing leads to the low projection because in Asian culture, you're not taught to speak up. Whereas in westernized society, US, Canada, UK, but mostly the US, probably the best example, you're
Yeah.
really just taught to stand out. It's like you need to stand out. You need to be above head and shoulder. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. Obviously there's balances between all those cultures that you need to take, but there's definitely truth there. So they're taught to be too loud and then they have to bring down the volume. Whereas in Indian culture, everyone's taught to, in Chinese culture, true, everyone's taught to just slow down, not say that much. So then that transitions the cultural habits of their life, then transition to other areas. Don't speak up at work. Don't ask for the promotion. Don't negotiate for the salary. Don't really aspire for more than you're already capable. You should already be happy with what you have. You're in the US. That's amazing, right? So I definitely feel there's a lot of commonalities there. But then in the coaching, I never bring those generalities because I'll always focus on the individual person. But I think that there's some truth to that nonetheless, for sure.
And Brendan, talk to me with your experience with, like you said, with the people that you've been working with. I feel like maybe not necessarily a very clear-cut confidence, but having some sort of self-assurance is a very important piece of public speaking. What would you say to anybody that doesn't have that? That's, oh no, I'm terrible, I'm horrible, I'm bad at this, I've never done this before, all of these kinds of excuses. What would you say to somebody like that listening?
Absolutely, Marty. So there's two main solutions to this problem. The second one's a little longer, so I'll cut it short a little bit. If you want me to go longer, I'll go longer. So the first part is whenever somebody tells me I can never be a great speaker, I can never share an idea with the world, I can never get on a stage, it's impossible for me. Instead of saying, no, it's not impossible, I switch it up on them a little bit. I just ask them to do an exercise that my coach taught me called the impossible log, where I have them write down 3 to 5 accomplishments that they've already achieved in their life. So that could be immigrating, in my case, in my client base's case, it's going to be immigrating to a brand new country, leaving everything behind in like India or China to go to the US. A second one could be starting a family, finding the love of their life, getting an amazing job, getting their first opportunity, starting a business, right? All these, having children, and all these big accomplishments. And then I just ask all of them, because they're all successful. Like everybody listens to this podcast, and they go, okay, did you do any of these with zero fear? And they go, well, no, I was scared. I was like, then why did you do it? How did you overcome your fear? How did you do that? What was the ingredients behind your success? And they said, well, I have to do it because it's necessary. I needed to move out for my children. I need to provide them a better life. And they give really good reasonings. And I go, why don't you just bring the same exact logic to communication? And that usually breaks the pattern. They go, oh, wow, you're right. I just need to earn the confidence. So that's solution one. Solution number two that I'll comment on a little, and I could expand if you want, is to outwork the self-doubt. That's what Alex Hormozy talks a lot about. I'm a big fan of that belief because a lot of my confidence was not like, especially in my cases, my clients are double my age. Like I'm currently 27, right? So some of my clients are in their 50s. So where do I find the confidence to coach them, Marty? And for me, the mindset has not been, oh, I kind of just woke up and drank a glass of water, did some breathing exercise. I'm not a big fan of those schools of thought. I think for me, it's like I've just done more reps than they've done in their life. So I've earned the confidence. What's one of those examples? So for me, communication is like juggling 18 balls at the same time, Marty. So the goal is you have to pick the three easiest ones to start. And the first one of those three is the random word exercise. You take a word like tissue box or cell phone or walnuts, something completely random, and you create 60-second presentations. So everybody always sucks at the exercise at the beginning. But if you do this 5 times a day for a month, you get really good and you earn that confidence. And then the last point is the reason I have the confidence to coach the student to do it 100 times. It's because I've done it 3,000 times. So it's not because I just woke up with a magic potion. It's because I earned that confidence over time.
I very much love that point, Brenden, and I would very much like to invite anybody listening to re-listen to the last few minutes again, because I feel like this is something that a lot of people have the misconception of, and I find it incredibly interesting where that comes from. But like you said, and I heard a quote, and I think it was even from Alex Hermosi as well, or somebody, I don't remember now, but they said that confidence is not knowing that you can do something, but having enough evidence in your background, in your history to support that you could do it. Because if you've never done something, then how could you possibly have the experience of, oh, surely I'm going to be good at this? But it's rather the self-assurance that, okay, I've done maybe something similar, or I've done, like you said, moved to a new country. I've had to go to new interviews in another language potentially, and now I'm here. And like you said, did you do it all, totally cold? Probably not. You probably struggled, but yet you did it. And so now you can have that confidence of, okay, I haven't done this before, but I can. So that's a really wonderful point.
Absolutely.
And would you say that with the confidence, like you said, that you have just done it more times, is that something that you have to motivate yourself to do? And I ask that because that's something that comes up a lot. I feel is okay, I really want to do it, but I'm not motivated. I don't know where to start. I don't know what to do. So how did you get started with, like you said, with doing the reps, but where did the first rep happen for you?
Yeah, for sure, Marty. So my personal story is probably a bad example for the general public, just because when I was 19 and that's when I started working on my communication. I mostly did it to win case competitions, right? Those competition programs I was telling you about earlier in the interview, where you kind of go there. And because I'm ultra competitive, I just started losing a bunch of them at the beginning, and then I got really mad and I said I need to get better at this. So I self-taught myself on how to speak. So it's not a great example. So for the general public, which I've kind of adjusted to over time as I matured in the space, is in the same way we think about fitness, let's bring that same analogy to communication. So in fitness, there's different ways to get started. The first step, which is actually the most important one that I'll comment on, is those steps are usually pretty obvious to the general public. Even if you have no experience in fitness, you're not a personal trainer, you don't have a dietitian or a nutritionist. It's not if you just you took a mic and you asked somebody on the street, hey, what would the three first things that you would do if you wanted to work on your health? Any weight class, it doesn't matter who they are. They'll say the same three things. They'll say, oh, I should probably drink a glass of water more instead of soft drinks, like removing stuff that isn't good for you. Probably working out. The walk that I'm doing right now, I should probably walk more. And three is probably sign up for a gym and do some more workouts. So it's a very obvious answer. We all know that. And it works. Gets us results. But in communication, if you took that same mic and you asked everyone around you, Marty, nobody knows the answer. So the first problem set, which actually is the core of my career, that's what I've really been focused on, is figuring how do we make communication as easy to master as fitness. That's really what my thought leadership is in a nutshell. That's the first piece, the problem. And the second one is the accountability. So let's tackle the first part. What are the three things that you should be doing? And if this is all you do from this entire interview, I consider that a massive win. The three easiest balls to juggle. So the first one, the random word exercise. Pick a word like cell phone, like doorknob. You'd be surprised how few people actually practice this, Marty. And that's really the key. Actually, you might not be surprised since you coach a lot of them yourself. Right? Now that I think about it. So how do we get people to do this? If you're somebody who's a little older listening to this, I always recommend doing this with your kids. Because if you have a 7-year-old running around a 9-year-old, they're actually a lot better than you at the exercise because they don't overthink it. They don't sit down and go, Dad, Mom, I want to talk about the fear of judgment for 25 minutes with you. That never happens. They just do the
I
exercise.
would hope not.
Second, yeah, let's hope not. Yeah. Second one is I always ask this like in a public crowd when people, I always go raise your hand if you shower every day, and then some people don't raise their hand. I was like, shit, this is problematic. And then I make a joke. But then the point is if you shower every day, you got 15, 20 minutes in the shower, you're not doing anything. So just do the random word exercise there. And those are some ways on how you can force yourself to do it. That's number one. The second exercise is the question drill. We get asked questions all the time in our life, Marty, at school, at work, on sales calls, on podcasts. But a lot of us are not ready for the questions that life will ask us. I'll give you an example with me. So a few years ago, when I started guesting on podcasts and I sucked at it, I remember some guy asked me, hey, Brenden, where does the fear of communication come from? And I looked at the guy, Marty, and I said, I don't know where the fear of communication comes from. Spain? I don't know. England?
Yeah.
Florida? You tell me. I have no idea. So how did I fix this? Every single day, Marty, for 5 minutes, I answered one question that I thought the world would ask me about my expertise. But if you do that once a day for 5 minutes, for a year, you'll have answered 365 questions about your expertise, and you'll be bulletproof. And then exercise number 3 is the birthday video message. Here's what I do every year, and I do this probably 150 to 200 times a year, where I have a Google Calendar that's actually on my screen right here, and it tells me whose birthday is it. And these are like important people in my life. It could be family members, close business partners, friends that I really like, my clients, obviously. And on their birthday, I'll literally open my phone. I'll take a stupid birthday hat that I bought for $10 on Amazon. And then I open my camera and I just go, guess whose birthday it is today? And I send these little birthday video messages. I don't retake the video. I don't put makeup on. I don't retake it 10 times. I just send it. And it makes their day. So what's the advice? The advice is really simple. Are you booking 15 minutes in your calendar every single day to do these 3 exercises? The random word exercise, the question drill, and the birthday video message. And to this day, Marnie, I have yet to meet one human being who hasn't paid for the accountability to do all 3 consistently. So I hope somebody out there just does it because it's free advice and nobody does it.
I've heard this a few times, very ironically to what we're talking about, but I've heard that if the advice is free, then nobody takes it because, like you said, if there is nobody standing over you, like, hey, you're supposed to do that, you paid for that. Oh, maybe you should actually use that, but oh, it's free. I can always listen back to it, and then 25 years later, oh, remember that exercise that I was supposed to do? So I guess that's very accurate.
I agree. That's really the problem. And once again, I'm always empathetic to this too, which is, the reason I started Master Talk was for people who couldn't afford a coach, right? I think the next Elon Musk, that's my mission statement, is a 7-year-old girl who can't afford a communication coach. That's basically the mission of what I do. So yes, there's gonna be a certain percentage of people like me, like you, I would argue, who will take the free advice that Hormozy gives us or anybody else gives us and actually apply it in the business, right? And study it religiously, maybe spend $10 on the book or something. But but there's also a huge percentage of people who will not do it without the accountability. So I think the key here, the key message is for you sitting here, ask yourself, are you serious about your communication skills? And if the answer is yes, then there's two paths. The first path is either earn the accountability or pay for the accountability. So what does that mean? Earn the accountability means either you're self-motivated enough to do it yourself, or you earn it by asking people around you to partner up with you. That could be kids are the easiest people to do this with. It could be family members. It could be people in a Toastmasters group, or you pay for it. So if you make like at least $80,000 to $100,000 a year, my advice would be just to pay for that accountability because at that level, when your hourly rate passes $50 an hour, your time then becomes more valuable than your money. So even if you could figure it out yourself, you probably shouldn't because you have other things to do with your time that are better suited.
Think that's a wonderful piece of advice, Brandon, and that's something that I think a lot of people struggle with, that they, okay, oh, I could figure this out on my own, and oh, all of this is on YouTube, and it is, of course. I mean, there is nothing that is not on YouTube, but with those kinds of services and with courses and books and so on, it's not really the information I feel that you're paying for, but rather the structure that you get it in, that you don't have to spend 20 hours looking for it in the first place. But here it is, magic music and so on. So I suppose that's a very, very good point. But there is something that I very much want to ask you, Brandon, and something that I've noticed as I've been sitting here and listening to you. I would wager that you are a very good storyteller, and I was wondering if for anybody listening, you could share some tips or some tricks on how to become better storytellers.
For sure, Marty, absolutely. And the only reason I'm telling stories well is because I tell the same stories every time I'm on a show. That's why. That's the secret. Okay, I'm not inventing all of this. But yeah, exactly. That's the secret, is there is no secret. But the point I want to drive, so there's two parts to this. The first part is if you don't have the foundations down in speaking, it doesn't matter how good the story is, it's gonna fall flat. Example, once upon a time, Marty, this happened in my life. So if you don't have the right vocal tones, you don't have the eye contact, you don't have the vocal projection, it's not going to help you. So in other words, what I'm trying to say, because I like repetition, is if you're not doing the random word exercise, if you're not doing the question drill, if you're not doing the video messages, forget about being an exceptional storyteller. That's a whole different skill set. So that's one. The second piece, Les Brown says it best: never make a point without telling a story, and never tell a story without making a point. What does he mean by that quote? He means that every single great story has a key lesson first. We all have that friend in our life who calls us up and goes, "Hey, Marty, you wouldn't believe what happened last week." You're like, "What happened?" And then they start talking. And then 20 minutes later, you're sitting there going like, "Where is the story going?" So how do you avoid this? You avoid this by starting with the key lesson first. What do you actually want to teach people through your story? And it doesn't have to be a lesson, like a life lesson. It could be a joke, something funny that happened in your life, or you shouldn't buy that piece of toast because it's bad for you, something random, right? Whatever that key lesson is. And then you reverse engineer the story. So, an example in my life to make this more practical, one of my key ideas whenever I show up on a podcast or a keynote is that I believe anybody can be an exceptional communicator. That's my belief. That's the lesson. But then, what is the best story? So now I'll try 100 different ideas or 10 different ideas. I'll tell the story of somebody who struggled with speaking. Maybe it was a client. Maybe it was a story of another famous person, or I could try metaphor, I could try statistic. But then when I try these different stories, I realize that the best one is my own, right? Because I'm telling it through the lens of my own story. So that's the one that hits really well. Grew up in a second language, crooked left arm, grew up studying accounting. If I could do it, anyone can. That's the story that I tell. But I've tried different story ideas. So the trick is you got to start with the lesson and then you reverse engineer the story. And that's how you master storytelling.
Has that ever not been the case for you? Have you ever had any experiences where that didn't quite work out, or is it 100% always?
I mean, I'd love your perspective on this, but I would say for me, Marty, there's some frameworks. Actually, let's talk about this because you bring up an interesting point. So, what do I think of frameworks in general? I think there's a lot of frameworks that cannot be cookie cutter. And this is coming from a lot of respect, by the way. It's not like a hate, it's more just it's good, but it's incomplete. So let's say we take Donner Miller's storytelling frameworks, right, from StoryBrand. He's like one of the best storytelling framework guys in the world, but his frameworks are too complicated. They don't always work. So, for example, if you take Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, right, so they start with the pain and then something happens in their life and then they overcome that. That's actually a really good framework. You could use that, but it doesn't apply all the time. Because if you look at that as a beginner, you might go, well, does every story need to be overly dramatic? Not really. Because there's a lot of stories in my life that are very lighthearted that don't follow Joseph's framework. Like the blueberry story, where it's like, I work in my basement all day. I won't tell the whole story, but I'll give the highlights. I work in my basement all day. My mom, my sister live upstairs. How do I build a relationship with them? Oh, well, every day when I walk upstairs, I'll grab blueberries and I ask them if they want them. And I'll have an intimate 5 to 10 minute conversation with them every day. And that 10-minute conversation is enough to build rapport. You don't need to spend 5 hours with them every day. So that doesn't follow Joseph's framework, but it still works. Whereas the one that I just presented that I got from Les, honestly, that I just made simpler from Les Brown, is that actually applies across the board, which is you tell a story, you get a lesson. I've never really seen a situation where somebody tells a story without a lesson and it's a great story, personally.
Yeah, yeah. I'm trying to think if there are any exceptions that I can think of coming back to what you said before, but I don't think so. I mean, some of the lessons are perhaps maybe a little bit too out there. I feel sometimes, especially when I think of movies or some cartoons or something like that. You sit there at the end and you're like, well, why is that the end? I mean, you could have done that so much better, I feel sometimes. So there is always a lesson. Is it a good lesson? Yeah, debatable, but it's true. It's true. There is always a lesson.
Right. And to your point, it doesn't have to be like change your life. Never give up. The lesson could be an interpretation. It could be a joke. Like stand-up comedians are a good example. Like for them, the lesson is not change your life. The lesson is the punchline of the joke. So it's a variable, but I might change my mind in 5 years. So you never know.
Yeah, I suppose with stand-up that's a good example as well because their lesson, what I gather, is typically don't do that,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is also a good lesson. So
Fair enough. Yeah, good point.
wonderful, wonderful. And tell me with stories, have you noticed that they create a better or closer, perhaps emotional connection with the people that you talk to? Because I feel like if it's just okay, you do XYZ, then okay, cool, I can do that. But it's more so, like you said, with the statistics, it's just pure information. But rather with the story, do you feel like it's more emotional, more intimate?
Absolutely, Marty. Here's a quote that people can write down that I accidentally came up with in my basement last week, which is vulnerability is the shortcut to likability. So what does that mean? The more vulnerable that we are in general, and you don't have to be traumatic, you don't have to go into a dark past or anything. But even like my blueberry story, it's lighthearted, it's a little bit, but I'm sharing a piece of who I am with the world, and that automatically increases my likability. Versus if I spend this conversation just talking about everything that's going right in my life, oh, the business is growing, all these clients, I'm so cool, and people don't like me. They'll look at me and go say, "Ah, oh, whatever. Brenden is just some weirdo that I don't want to follow anymore or look up to." So it's that missing piece, and I think what personal stories get right is that shortcut is a lot faster. Like if you hear someone just give a speech and you've never met them in their life, and they start telling you this riveting personal story, your trust factor goes from 0 to 80 a lot faster, I've found, than any other strategy. Because I've tried most of them, right? Metaphors, analogies, stories of other people also works. But when you share your own frame, nothing is faster because you're the person who lived it and you're right in front of them to answer any questions about the story. So it's a lot more riveting. So I do believe that is a shortcut. But the point I want to drive here, especially with executives, is a lot of people have constraints. They have like excuses as to why they don't want to do this. They go, "Oh, well, what happens to my reputation? What happens if I share too much?" And my answer to all of those concerns is always, who said personal stories had to be a traumatic past about your alcoholic father? Who said personal stories had to be something really tragic happened in your life? There was a car accident or something. Personal just means relatable. Just share a small piece of who you are. So when I teach this to students, I never go for the jugular, so to speak. I start with the easiest possible story. So I'll literally make a list of their life with their key lessons, and I'll just go, okay, what do you think's the easiest story to tell? They'll go, oh, the easiest story to tell is when my kid was yelling yesterday about wanting a candy bar, and it made me feel really overwhelmed because I had work and I was really stressed out. So notice how that doesn't affect your reputation because it's just a story that everyone goes through. But people, even if I don't have kids, but people relate through the lens of that person because they see themselves in that story.
And have you noticed that more recent stories work better or older stories? Like you said, for example, with the, let's say, the great beginnings, any differences there?
That's a really, I have to think about that one, Marty. No one's asked me that question. Is there a difference if the story was recent versus old? I'll give you my current opinion, but it'll probably change as I think through that question a little bit more
Okay.
after the podcast is over, which is I do believe there's value in recency because you're talking to a population who's in that current culture, right? So, for example, if you're talking about a story in the 1900s, it could still work. But of course, because we don't interact, we don't know, we can't talk to those human beings in some way, shape, or form, there is an argument to be made that stories that happened recently in your life could have more value for sure. But the reason I say could is because there's still a lot of value in some stories that happened in the past that people will always remember throughout time, right? Like a good example of this is the Orwell brothers inventing the airplane, right? So that happened 100 years ago, but it's so inspiring, right? Everybody told like machines that could fly, like that sounds ridiculous, right? Or the story of how gum was invented, which is totally random. Right? It was like an accident. They were like trying to build phosphate or something. I forgot the story was a little bit, but you get the idea. So there's I think there's some value for sure in the recency because you can relate. So let's say Gary Vaynerchuk shares a story, but you can talk to him because he's still alive. So it makes the story a lot more poignant. Whereas something that's old, I think there's value in some old as gold stories, but you have to be a little bit more selective about that selection.
Very much like to point out that you didn't even though you might not have immediately known the answer to that question, so just would like to make full circle
For sure.
with that. Awesome, awesome, perfect. And tell me, Brandon, do you have any pieces of wisdom, any thoughts that you would like to leave anybody listening with?
Yeah, for sure, Marty. I think for me, the big piece behind my thought leadership is this question. And the question is that a lot of people don't ask ourselves at all. How would your life change if you were an exceptional communicator? You know, the problem I have with this industry, Marty, is it's so plagued in negativity and bad energy. It's very, hey, like you're scared of this. It's the number one fear in the world. Everyone's going to die. And I'm just looking at this and going, I don't like that energy because that's not how you get better in any other skill. You don't go into fitness and going, you're going to, I mean, you're going to be overweight for the rest of your life. Your whole life is in danger. You're going to die. Like it's a little bit more upbeat, right? And I want to bring that energy more in the context of communication. So I encourage people for 10 to 15 minutes today, if they want, to reflect on that question. because there's an answer for all of us. For some of us listening to this podcast, it's I want to build a bigger business, I want to have a bigger career, so communication allows me to make more money. But it's also I could be a better parent for my children. I could be a better friend for the people around me because communication is the accelerant of dreams. It doesn't matter what the dream is, whether it's to build a big business, start a family, be a better friend for the people around you. Communication helps you get there a lot faster.
Well, I can certainly see how you close your clients. Very, very inspirational. Love that. And for anybody listening that wants to listen to more of your wisdom and to more of your life lessons, where can people find you?
That's so fun. You would think I use that close. Yeah, that doesn't work on executives because
No.
then they think I'm some wishy-washy
Uh,
magician or something. But yes, I do preach the gospel after they're in the program. But yes, it was, by the way, Marty, before I talk about where to find me, it was such a pleasure being on the show. I love the way that you ask really nuanced questions. You're not afraid to go into the depth of somebody's expertise, and you really pushed me, which is really rare in interviews for
yep.
me. So I really appreciated that. Thanks for that. So there's two ways to keep in touch. The first one is the YouTube channel. Just go to Master Talk in one word, and you'll have access to everything that you need. And the second way to keep in touch is I do a free workshop over Zoom that's live on how to communicate ideas effectively. So if you want to jump on that free call, I do one every 2 weeks. Just go to rockstarcommunicator.com and just register for the next free training.
And all the links will be down in the description below. And Brenden, any final words?
That was it. That you did such a great
Yeah.
job with this. I really appreciate it.
So do I. So do I. Well, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for sharing all of your very riveting stories and for everything that you shared with us today. I very, very much appreciate it. And I'm hoping to stay in touch.
Likewise.
Hey, I'm glad to see you here. Let me know what you most enjoyed about this conversation, and if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. I'll see you in the next one. Do zobaczenia.